Today we have the fun of talking to Bob King, who's a friend of the Meter Center. We're going to be talking about the Meter Center's collection of medals. And it's actually a collection which Bob helped create. So we're going to be talking about what a medal collection is and how it's formed. And so we want to begin with the very first question. So Bob, as we begin, please explain to all of us what we're talking about when we're talking about a medal collection. What are they? What are commemorative medals? I guess the fancy name is numismatics, but what is a medal collection?
Yeah, a medal collection is a collection of medals, tokens, medallions that were struck to honor, remember, or commemorate a certain event or person in history. And usually it's distinguished from currency. You know, these aren't money that you would drop into a vending machine or anything like that, but were struck specifically for notable events or notable people.
Okay, good. So what got you interested in medals and then the idea of even collecting them?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it was sitting at this very table. I was pursuing my master's degree at an area institution, and I was doing much of the study here in the Meter Center. And one day, while in here studying, a gentleman came in with medals, and that he was, I believe, donating to the Meter Center. And I had the opportunity while sitting here to flip through and see them with you. And my curiosity was piqued at that time, and went home. And weeks later, just scouring eBay, came across a medal and thought, oh, well, this is interesting. I'll purchase this one. And that's where it was born, from a little interest here at the Meter Center to almost an obsession at times. So.
An addiction. Okay. What sort of struck you that day as you looked at them? I mean, when he walks in and shows us these medals, what piqued your interest?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, it was just a love for Calvin himself. Just Calvin, the pastor. I was a pastor at the time, and just loved many of the things that Calvin himself was doing as a pastor, and just thought it'd be an interesting way to know him more, to honor him, and lo and behold, it became a large hobby.
So, do you remember your first medal?
I do. In fact, I've brought it here with me. It's from 1909, struck in Germany by Mayer and Wilhelm in Stuttgart. And the interesting thing with that medal is, as the years progressed, and I've been collecting for 20 plus years now, I would attempt to purchase 2 specimens of each medal, so I could show the front and the back in my display case. And this medal in particular, being the first one, I searched for years and years to find a second one to display the back, and still have never found a second specimen. So it seems my first medal is actually possibly one of the rarer ones.
Most unique. Fascinating. Okay. So this was struck in 1909. It's now 2020. Have medals been struck since then and before then? And what's the history here?
Yes, hundreds and hundreds have been struck. Usually there's a flurry of activity in crafting medals around Calvin's birth date or Luther's birth date. Through the 1517 as often considered the initiation of the Reformation. So 1617, 1717, 1817, and on there's usually quite a bit of activity.
Okay. So how many medals did you ultimately collect, do you think?
Yeah, I'd have to take a stab at an estimate. Probably around 150 different medals of Calvin. Okay. And then probably 350 of the Reformation and Protestantism in general.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So when do you think the last Calvin medal was struck?
Actually, quite recently. Let's see, this is 2020, 2017. Okay. There were quite a few that were struck. 2009, quite a few were struck.
In fact, the Meter Center had its own medal made at that point too. Right.
Very beautiful medal.
Yeah, it is. It's a very nice medal. It is. So do you have a favorite Calvin medal?
Yes, medals are somewhat like children. They're all my favorite for different reasons, but brought a couple here. And this one would be stretching the limits of what would be considered a medal. This might actually breach more into sculpture, but it's closely related to other specimens that were crafted around the same time. But I love it for its girth. It's very artistic, stylistic of the time. Very much enjoy that one. Probably my favorite, and I might consider the crown of my collection, would be one of the very first medals of Calvin ever struck. It's a satirical medal struck in the 1500s while Calvin was still living. It's called a double-sided medal. As you can see, there's an image on one direction, and you can rotate it and get a second image. And the inscription says, "John Calvin, chief of the heretics." And so it's just a fun one as the Catholics attempted to satirize Calvin and the Protestants. It's just been one of the funnest in my collection.
Oh, neat. Well, that raises a question in my mind all of a sudden. So you've got folks satirizing Calvin, but what about the Reform side? Were they satirizing the Catholics as well?
Yes, they actually started it.
Okay.
Yes, this medal's actually modeled off of early German medals that were struck to show the unity between the emperor and the pope. And those medals were then satirized by the Protestants that would show the pope actually as the devil, as you turn the image. And then the Catholics returned the favor by changing the inscription. And so that you've got the devil again with what they would say is a picture of Calvin, the Pope of the Protestants,
Sure.
And satirizing him. So yes, the Protestants started it.
Okay. So this also raises another question. This is a good way to learn your history, it sounds to me, because you said, they're struck at various times. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? How that might be a good way to learn your history, learn about history?
No, Paul, that is a great question. What was the purpose of some of these early medals, especially ones that don't necessarily connect with certain dates in history? And the theory out there is that they were didactic tools. They were teaching tools to learn theology or dogma, or to be reminded of theology. And but yes, it's a phenomenal way to learn history. Most of my knowledge of history is because of remembering the dates of certain medals and the events that they commemorate.
Yeah, good point. That's great. Okay. So instead of baseball cards, you can get your children
yes.
learning history through a medal. Okay. So let's turn the conversation more to the collecting side of this as a hobby. So what advice would you give to someone who's interested in collecting anything, but in this particular case, in collecting medals, and in this case, Reformation medals?
Yes, advice is just to hunt and hunt and hunt and hunt. And the internet makes it much easier these days, and Google Translate makes it easy to search and attempt to find things, especially in Europe where many of these stem from. So just overturning any stone, and then just patience. This is it's meant to be joyful. That's what hobbies do, and jokingly mentioned it becoming an obsession. And there can be a line that's crossed where it's almost a ball and chain more than it is a joy. So be careful there.
Right. Okay. So are there official websites or clubs or societies that people should know about if they're interested in collecting medals?
Yeah, I only know of one, and it's not terribly active. It's called the International Association of Reformation Coins and Medals.
Okay.
And it was founded by a gentleman, Daniel Harmelink, who is at the Concordia Historical Institute in Missouri. Actually has Grand Rapids ties as well. But he started that as a place for collectors of all types of Reformation medals to come together to learn more, to share the things that they have found as well.
Okay. Well, to sort of conclude our time, we should mention, you mentioned Concordia Historical Institute. So here's a book, The Reformation Coin and Medal Collection, which is a good resource for finding all sorts of images with descriptions. So it's just a fun reference work. So here's an example of some pages from it. But Bob, you also were instrumental in pulling together a little book that actually describes the Meter Center's collection, so a catalog of medals. So you did this a number of years ago, but it's a wonderful resource that lists all the medals that at least you knew about at that time, with pictures and a description. And it's a great finding guide for us here in the Meter Center as well as we continue to collect medals or find medals. So Bob, thank you for talking to us today. This has been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you.
And we look forward to gathering more medals over time. So thank you.
And seriously, thank you as well in the Meter Center. It brings joy to me to have a collection that can be shared with other people who are interested. So thank you for always having me in and wanting to know more.